The forest of ironwood was not merely a collection of trees. It was a living, breathing entity that remembered everything. It was a place where shadows stretched long even at noon, and the silence was so deep it pressed against the eardrums like water. It was a place for things that wanted to be forgotten, and Torstein wanted, more than anything, to be forgotten. He was an old man now, weathered by 70 harsh winters. His back, once straight as a spear and broad enough to carry a shield wall, was now bent like a wind-twisted pine. His hands, which had once held the fate of clans and the lives of kings in their grip, now trembled with a subtle palsy when he poured his morning tea. He lived in a small, moss-covered cabin, miles from the nearest road, surrounded by hives of bees and the quiet rustle of the leaves. But Torstein was never truly alone. Always at his side, moving like a drift of smoke, was Fenrir. Fenrir was not a dog. He was a wolf of the northern wastes, massive and primal. His fur was as white as fresh snow on a mountain peak, his eyes intelligent and amber, holding a wisdom that seemed older than the forest itself. Torstein remembered the day they met, 10 years ago. It had been a blizzard that froze birds mid-flight. He had found the pup caught in a rusty iron trap, its leg mangled, whimpering in the snow. Any other man would have killed it for the pelt or out of mercy. But Torstein saw something in the pup's eyes, a defiance, a refusal to die that mirrored his own. He had carried the wolf home inside his tunic, warming it with his own body heat. He had nursed it back to health, feeding it broth from a spoon. And in return, the wolf had given him something he thought he had lost forever when he buried his wife: loyalty without blood. E percenta evrided. They were a pair, the broken old man and the white wolf. They walked the woods together in a silent rhythm. Fenrir would herd the deer toward Torstein's bow, though the old man rarely hunted now, preferring his vegetables and honey. When the nightmares of the past came to haunt Torstein's sleep, nightmares of screaming men, burning thatched roofs, and the metallic smell of blood, Fenrir would sense the change in his breathing. The wolf would climb onto the bed and rest his heavy head on the old man's chest, his steady heartbeat anchoring Torstein to the present, chasing the ghosts away. To the few traders who passed by once a season to buy Torstein's famous wildflower honey, he was just Old Gray, a hermit waiting to die. They pitied him. They did not know. They did not know that beneath the floorboards of his cabin, wrapped in oil, soaked cloth and buried under 3 feet of packed earth, lay 2 axes of black steel. They did not know that Torstein was once whispered about in the great halls of kings. They did not know that 30 years ago he had been the Red Hand, a berserker so terrifying, so unstoppable, that enemy armies would break rank and flee at the mere sight of his banner. Torstein had buried the Red Hand. He had washed the blood from his soul with silence, time, and the hum of his bees. He thought the monster was dead. He prayed the monster was dead. But monsters do not die. They only sleep, and the world has a cruel way of waking them up. The day the world ended began with sunshine. It was a rare, warm day in late autumn. The light filtered through the golden leaves, painting the forest floor in dappled patterns. Torstein was tending to his hives, moving with slow, deliberate motions, the smoke from his smoker curling around his white beard. Fenrir was dozing in a patch of sun near the porch, twitching his paws in a dream chase, perhaps hunting a dream rabbit. The sound of hooves shattered the peace. It wasn't the slow trot of a trader's mule. It was the heavy, thundering gallop of war horses. Torstein straightened up, wiping his sticky hands on his rough tunic. He watched as 6 riders emerged from the tree line, tearing through the underbrush with no respect for the path. They wore fine chainmail that gleamed in the sun and cloaks of deep crimson velvet, the colors of Jarl, the new, ambitious lord of the valley. The leader of the group was a young man named Ivar. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, with cold eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently curled in a sneer. He rode a massive black stallion that he handled too roughly, jerking the reins with unnecessary force. Ivar shouted, reining in his horse near the garden, his beast trampling Torstein's rows of turnips. "Old man, bring us water, and mead, if you have it. My throat is dry." Torstein leaned on his staff, his knuckles white. He didn't bow. He didn't look down. "There is a stream 50 paces back," he said, his voice rusty from days of disuse. "The water is cold and clear. The stream belongs to everyone. My mead belongs to me." Ivar's eyes narrowed. He laughed, a harsh barking sound that made the birds take flight. He speaks. I thought you were a mute decoration, carved from rot and bone. Did you hear me, peasant? I am Ivar Bordson. This is my father's land. Every tree, every stone, every drop of water, and every old fool living on it belongs to us. You will serve me. I serve no man, Torstein said calmly. I trade honey for flour. I pay my taxes when the collector comes. I bother no one. Leave me in peace. Ivar's smile vanished. The arrogance of youth clashed with the immovable object of age. He dismounted, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. He walked up to Torstein, looming over him. Ivar was young, strong, fed on the best meat, and armed with a sword at his hip. Torstein was unarmed, frail, and looked as if a strong wind could knock him over. You have no respect, Ivar hissed, leaning in close. He smelled of wine and sweat. He looked around the cabin, his eyes calculating. This is a fine spot. Good elevation. A clear view of the valley. Perfect for a hunting lodge. He turned back to Torstein. Pack your things, old man. Take your rags and go. You have until sunset to leave. I am claiming this hill. Torstein didn't flinch. He planted his feet. I built this house with my own hands before your father was born. My wife is buried beneath the willow tree. Her spirit is in the soil. I will not leave. He raised his gloved hand and, with all his strength, backhanded Torstein across the face. The blow was unexpected. It knocked the old man to the ground. Torstein tasted the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. His vision swam. He lay in the dirt, his frail body aching, his staff rolling away. A low, menacing growl filled the air. It sounded like the earth itself tearing open. Fenrir, the white wolf, had risen. He stood over his fallen master, his hackles raised, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised absolute death. He was huge, terrifying, a primal force of nature protecting his pack. Ivar stumbled back, fear flashing in his eyes for the first time. He reached for his sword, fumbling with the hilt. "Wolf!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Kill it! Kill the beast!" "No!" Torstein rasped, spitting blood, trying to push himself up. "Fenrir, down! Stand down! Go!" But Fenrir would not leave. He lunged at Ivar, snapping at his boot. "Loose!" Ivar screamed to his men. One of the guards, a man with a heavy crossbow, had already raised his weapon. Thwack! The sound was sickeningly wet. The bolt flew true. It struck Fenrir deep in the chest. The wolf yelped, a sound of surprise and pain that tore Torstein's heart in two and fell to the ground. But he wasn't dead. He was a fighter. He tried to rise, his legs scrabbling in the dirt, snapping at the air, trying to get between the men and his master even as his lifeblood stained the white snow of his fur crimson. Another guard stepped forward with a boar spear. "No!" Torstein screamed. The sound tore from his throat, raw and desperate. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, clawing at the dirt, trying to cover the wolf with his own body. "Please, take the land, take everything, just let him be." But a guard kicked Torstein in the ribs, flipping him over and pinning him to the ground with a heavy boot on his chest. Torstein gasped, helpless, pinned like an insect. He watched. He was forced to watch. The guard drove the spear into the wolf's side. The amber light in his eyes, which had always looked at Torstein with such gentleness, began to fade. The wolf looked at the old man one last time. There was no accusation in that look, only love, only a silent goodbye. And then he was gone. The great white chest stopped moving. Ivar walked over to the carcass. He nudged it with his boot. "A fine pelt," he sneered. "A bit bloody now, but it will clean up. Skin it. It will make a good cloak for my saddle." The world went silent for Torstein. The birds stopped singing. The wind stopped blowing. There was only a ringing in his ears, louder than any war horn. "Leave him," Torstein whispered. The voice didn't sound like his own. It didn't sound human. It sounded like grinding stones in a deep cavern. Ivar looked down at the broken old man in the dirt. His eyes were no longer the watery blue eyes of a honey farmer. The light in them had gone out. In its place was a void, a cold, dead shark's gaze. "Take the land," Torstein whispered, each word a drop of poison. "Take the honey, but leave the body. Or I will follow you to the gates of hell and drag you through them myself." Ivar laughed nervously. A chill went down his spine, though he couldn't explain why. There was something in the old man's gaze, something ancient and dangerous, that made his skin crawl. "You have nothing. You are nothing." Ivar mounted his horse, signaling his men. "We will be back in 2 days to start building the lodge. If you are still here, I will feed you to the crows alongside your mutt." The riders turned and galloped away, their laughter echoing in the trees. They left behind a broken old man, a ruined garden, and a bloody patch of white fur. Torstein lay in the dirt for a long time. The sun began to set, turning the sky the color of a bruise. The bees returned to their hives, confused by the smell of blood. Slowly, painfully, Torstein stood up. His ribs burned, his face throbbed, but he didn't cry. He didn't scream. The part of him that could feel grief had died the moment Fenrir took his last breath. Now, there was only cold, mechanical purpose. He went to the shed and got a shovel. The metal scraped against the dirt. He dug a grave beneath the willow tree, next to the sunken mound of his wife. The digging was hard. His old muscles protested. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he didn't stop until the hole was deep. He lifted Fenrir. The wolf was heavy, dead weight. Torstein held him close for a moment, burying his face in the fur that still smelled of sun and pine. He placed him inside gently. He washed the blood from the white fur with a wet rag. He placed his own favorite carving knife in the grave, so the wolf would have a weapon in the afterlife. He filled the hole. He rolled a heavy stone over the mound. "Sleep now," he said softly to the fresh earth. "I have work to do." He turned to the cabin. He walked inside. He shoved the heavy oak table aside with a strength he hadn't used in decades. He grabbed a crowbar and pried up the floorboards in the center of the room. The nails shrieked as they were pulled free. The smell of oil, old leather, and cold iron rose up from the darkness beneath the floor. There they were, wrapped in thick, oil-soaked leather that had not been touched in 30 years. He reached down. His hands trembled, but not from age, from memory. He unwrapped them. Twin battle axes. They were not the tools of a woodsman. They were instruments of war. The blades were black iron, forged in the fires of the deep south, etched with runes of destruction that promised death to all they touched. The hafts were wrapped in darkness, stained leather, leather stained by the sweat and blood of the Red Hand. They were heavy, unbalanced to any normal man. But as Torstein gripped them, a change came over him. His hands stopped shaking. The tremors vanished. His back straightened, the vertebrae popping into alignment. His shoulders squared. The years seemed to melt away, sloughing off like dead skin, replaced by the rigid, coiled posture of a killer. He went to an old chest at the foot of his bed. He opened it. He pulled out a chainmail shirt, tarnished but unbreakable. He pulled on his old leather bracers, scarred from 100 sword deflects. He pulled out a cloak of dark gray wool, tattered at the edges, the cloak of a reaper. He sat by the dying fire. He pulled out a whetstone. For the rest of the night, the only sound in the lonely cabin was the rhythmic shh of stone on steel. Sparks flew in the darkness. Torstein didn't eat. He didn't eat. He sharpened the blades until they could split a hair floating in the air. He sharpened them until they were hungry. At dawn, he took a knife and shaved his white beard. He cut it close, leaving only a short, grim stubble that revealed the jagged scar running down his jawline. He took a piece of charcoal from the fire and painted his eyes black, the mark of the berserker, the mark of the Red Hand. He stepped out of the cabin. The morning air was cold. He looked at the fresh grave under the willow. "They think I am an old man," Torstein said to the wind. "They are right. I am an old man. But the Red Hand is ageless." He began to walk. He didn't run. He walked with a steady, relentless pace that could eat up miles without tiring, toward the valley, toward Jarl's fortress. Ivar was celebrating. The great hall of his father was a fortress of stone and timber, perched on a hill overlooking the village. It was filled with smoke, the smell of roasting pork, and loud, drunken music. Jarl was away on a raid across the sea, leaving his son in charge, and Ivar was making the most of it. He sat on the high throne, wearing a new white fur cloak, Fenrir's skin. It was crudely skinned, blood still staining the edges, but Ivar wore it like a trophy. "To the hunt!" Ivar shouted, raising his drinking horn, spilling ale down his chin. "That land will make a fine kennel for my dogs." The men cheered. They were 50 strong, seasoned warriors, mercenaries, and housecarls. They felt safe behind their high walls, confident in their numbers. The heavy wooden gates of the fortress were guarded by 2 men. They were bored, leaning on their spears, their breath misting in the cold evening air. They saw a figure approaching from the mist that clung to the valley floor. A lone man, walking slowly up the causeway. "Halt!" the guard shouted. "The gates are closed for the night. Turn back." The figure didn't stop. He didn't speed up. He just kept walking. "Thud, thud, thud." "I said halt, old man," the guard yelled, stepping forward and lowering his spear. "Are you deaf, or do you want to die?" Torstein stepped into the circle of torchlight. He held an axe in each hand. The metal gleamed black, drinking the light. His eyes were circled in black charcoal. "Open the gate," Torstein said. His voice was low, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a grave. "Go home, old fool, before you cut yourself with those toys." He lunged with his spear, a mocking thrust intended to frighten the old man. Torstein didn't flinch. He didn't dodge. He moved into the strike. He parried the spear with his left axe, hooking the wood and snapping the shaft like a dry twig. In the same motion, his right axe moved in a blur that the eye couldn't follow. The guard's head fell from his shoulders before his body knew it was dead. It hit the mud with a wet thud. The second guard froze. His brain couldn't process what he had just seen. An old man moving with the speed of a viper. He opened his mouth to scream for help. Torstein threw his left axe. It spun through the air, a black disk of death, and buried itself deep in the guard's chest. The scream died in his throat. Torstein walked forward calmly. He retrieved his axe, wrenching it free with a wet suck. He pushed the heavy timber gates open. They groaned on their hinges. He walked into the main courtyard. Music was still playing inside the hall. A group of 10 men were gambling by a fire pit in the center of the yard. They looked up as the stranger entered. They saw the 2 bodies at the gate. One of them screamed, scrambling for his sword. "Alarm!" The courtyard exploded into chaos. The gambling table was overturned. Men rushed out of the barracks, half-armored, swords drawn. They surrounded the old man. "Kill him!" the captain of the guard shouted. "Cut him down!" He let out a roar, not a scream of fear, but the battle cry of the berserker, a sound that had not been heard in the north for 30 years. He met the wave of men like a breaking wave against a rock. He was a whirlwind of black steel. He didn't fight like a man. He fought like a force of nature. He ducked under a sword swing, his movement fluid and impossible for his age. He hamstrung the attacker with a low sweep of his axe. He spun, driving his other axe into a man's helmet, splitting it like a melon. He hooked a shield with one blade, pulled it down, and struck the exposed neck with the other. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Torstein moved with an economy of motion that was horrifying to watch. No wasted energy. Every swing ended a life or broke a bone. He was the Red Hand, and he was painting the snow crimson. "He's a demon," a young soldier screamed, watching his comrades fall. "He doesn't stop." Torstein took a cut to his shoulder. He didn't even grunt. He took a shield bash to the face. He spit out a tooth and headbutted the attacker, shattering the man's nose. The pain was distant. The pain was fuel. Within minutes, 12 men lay dead or dying in the courtyard. The snow was turned to red slush. The remaining guards backed away, terror in their eyes, their weapons shaking. "Who are you?" the captain whispered, clutching a wounded arm, retreating toward the hall. "What are you?" "I am the consequences of your actions," Torstein growled. He marched toward the great hall. The heavy double doors were barred from the inside. He struck the wood with both axes. Crack, crack, crack. Splinters flew. He hit it again and again, with the rhythm of a blacksmith forging doom. Inside the hall, the music had died. The guests stood frozen. Ivar stood up from his throne, his face pale as milk. "What is happening out there?" "What is happening out there?" The doors shattered inward. Torstein stepped into the hall. He was covered in blood from head to toe, none of it his own. His charcoal-rimmed eyes locked onto the throne. He looked like a nightmare risen from the grave to claim a debt. 50 men stood in the hall, housecarls, elite guards. But when they saw the look in Torstein's eyes, they felt like children facing a wolf. Ivar recognized him. He recognized the eyes. "The old man," he whispered in disbelief. "The honey farmer? Ivar Borgsen." Torstein's voice boomed, bouncing off the rafters and silencing the room. "You stole a life that was not yours to take. Now I am here to collect the debt." "Kill him!" Ivar shrieked, his voice high and terrified. He hid behind his bodyguards. "He is one man. He is old. Kill him. The elite housecarls charged. These were not courtyard guards. These were veteran killers in full plate armor. Torstein dropped his axe. The room gasped. Had he surrendered? Was the old man finally tired? No. No. He snapped the shaft in half over his knee, creating 2 short spears. He moved. He was faster than thought. He impaled the first housecarl through the gap in his armor. He used the dying man's body to block a sword strike from the second. He kicked the second man into the open fire pit in the center of the room. The man screamed as the flames took him. Torstein picked up a heavy oak table with a strength born of pure rage and threw it at 3 attackers, crushing them against the stone wall. He fought with fists, with feet, with teeth. He tore a man's throat out with his bare hand. He broke arms like dry sticks. He was a blur of violence. The legend of the Red Hand was real. He was a berserker who had embraced the beast one last time, burning the last of his life force for this moment of vengeance. The hall became a charnel house. Men fled, dropping their weapons. Others died where they stood. The air was thick with the smell of blood and fear. Finally, only Ivar was left. The young Jarl stood by the throne, trembling uncontrollably. He held a jeweled sword with shaking hands. He was still wearing the white wolf cloak, now stained with fresh blood. He was breathing heavily now, a rasping, wet sound. Old age was finally catching up to his lungs. His body was a map of cuts and bruises, but his gaze was steady. He stopped 5 paces from Ivar. The silence in the hall was deafening. The silence in the hall was deafening. Torstein said softly, "It does not belong to you. Stay back," Ivar screamed, swinging the sword wildly at the air. "My father is Jarl Borg. He has an army. He will flay you alive. He will burn your forest to ash." "Your father will find nothing but ash when he returns," Torstein said. He walked forward. He walked straight into the sword swing. Ivar's blade struck Torstein's left shoulder, biting deep into the meat, hitting bone. Torstein didn't even blink. He didn't stop. Ivar's eyes widened in horror. "Why won't you die?" he whimpered. Torstein reached out with his right hand and grabbed Ivar by the throat. He lifted the young lord off the ground, his feet kicking helplessly. Ivar dropped his sword. He clawed at Torstein's iron grip, gasping for air. "Please!" "I'll give you land. I'll give you anything. Mercy." Torstein looked into Ivar's eyes. He saw the terror there. He saw the same fear Fenrir must have felt in his final moments. "I do not want your gold," Torstein whispered, leaning close so Ivar could smell the blood on his breath. "I do not want your land." He tightened his grip. "I want my dog back." There was a sickening crunch. Ivar went limp. Torstein dropped the body. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. Torstein stood there for a moment swaying. He reached down and gently unclasped the white wolf cloak from the dead boy's shoulders. He shook the blood off it as best he could. He draped it over his own wounded arm. He looked around the ruined hall. The surviving servants cowered in the shadows, waiting for death. "Tell Jarl Borg," Torstein said to the shadows. "Tell him the Red Hand came. Tell him the debt is paid. And tell him, if he comes looking for me, he should bring more men." Torstein turned and walked out into the night. He walked back through the gates, past the bodies in the courtyard, past the broken spears. He walked back into the forest. The walk home took hours. He bled into the snow with every step. He reached his cabin as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He went to the willow tree. He knelt by the grave. He placed the white fur pelt over the stone mound, tucking it in like a blanket for a sleeping child. "I got it back, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. "I got it back." Torstein sat there for a long time. The rage faded, leaving only a deep, aching emptiness. He stood up, groaning. He took the black axes. He went into the cabin and placed them back in the hole beneath the floor. He covered them with earth. He nailed the floorboards shut. He made himself a cup of tea with trembling hands. He sat on his porch, watching the bees dance in the morning light, starting their day's work as if nothing had happened. He was alone again. The silence returned to the forest, but it was different now. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a graveyard. Torstein closed his eyes, listening to the wind in the pines. He knew Jarl Borg would come. He knew war would come to his doorstep again in the spring. There would be no more peace for the Red Hand. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, he would sit with his wolf. The old man smiled, just faintly, as he imagined a massive white wolf running through the clouds, chasing a sun rabbit across the sky. "Wait for me, Fenrir," he whispered to the morning air.